I was listening to some old British comedy, and I know you're thinking, Dave, what are you doing listening to old British comedy? It's what I do, Brad. It's what I do.
Oh, God.
But I'm listening to old British comedy, and one of the, that's very RP British, that received pronunciation British. It's very high, oh, hello. It's how you speak when you speak to the Queen, that kind of thing.
Right, yes.
And one of the guys says to another guy, the guy falls on bad luck, and he goes, oh, I say, old boy, hard cheese.
You do that beautifully. What the heck does hard cheese mean?
Well, this is what I want to break down with you from a comedic standpoint, is, I get what they're saying is that, when you've left cheese out and it just gets hard and gross and, no one wants to eat hard cheese. But, who was the British guy that's like, I know the perfect thing to say at this moment for Gary, who just lost his wife? Hard cheese, old boy.
Hard cheese, old boy.
Hard cheese.
It is, when you start to break down idioms, the things that people choose to commemorate with an idiom is really odd,
Oh yeah, the working backwards on that culturally is, granted, it speaks so much to the British that cheese is the central point to refer to.
Yeah.
That's like saying, cold tea, old boy, cold tea. I'm sorry. But I just thought you would appreciate, of all phrases, hard cheese, because what a random Englishism that is. Hard cheese, old boy.
Yeah, and it's plus the poetry of it, that short A and the long E, hard cheese. It's just it's satisfying to say. It's got a really good etymology behind it.
Oh, it's very satisfying to say. You know what? I wonder how much of it is just that it's satisfying to say. It has, in food terms, it has good mouthfeel,
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, for me, the go-to British comedy that I can watch all the way through so many times and never get bored of it is Fawlty Towers. I can just listen to those voices forever and not get tired of it.
The episode where the Germans come to stay is amazing.
Topped only by when the Australian woman who's very attractive comes, and John Cleese continually finds himself in situations where he's looks like he's creeping on the tourist. And there's one amazing scene where he ends up mistakenly touching her inappropriately because he thinks there's a light switch. His wife comes in and catches them. And she delivers one of the most wonderful lines I've ever heard. If you're going to grope a woman, Basil, at least have the gallantry to stay in the same room.
What? I don't remember this scene at all.
Oh my goodness. It's very contrived. For some reason, all of a sudden she decides that she needs to stand with her back to the wall right by the bathroom door and put her arms above her head and start stretching. Meanwhile, he's in the bathroom checking the light fixture. He brings his arm outside to try to check the outside light fixture. Instead, of course, gropes her. And that's when his wife walks in.
Well, this has been our special section, comedy written by and for 12-year-old boys.
Yes. But the line is so beautiful. If you're going to grope somebody, at least have the gallantry to stay in the same room.
What a random bit of, having not seen that scene myself, that's so random to hear it described. Amazing. Well, you know what I say to that comedy bit? Hard cheese, old boy, Brad. Hard cheese indeed. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of Webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. And Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, and specifically, let's talk comics in the year behind us, Brad, 2018. Oh. We're closing out the year, my friend, and we have had a mixture of good and bad. And I think it is a great thing to do before you make plans for 2019, which will be our next show, to talk about what we did right, what we did wrong, what we did middling, and how we can improve our friendship with Brad Geiger in 2019. These are the big takeaways I want to get to.
Yes. Well, listen, first what we
Yes.
need to do, all of those sound good to me. But the first thing we need to do is I think we need to congratulate ourselves because it's the end of 2018 and we have gone, I think at this point, this is show 52 or 51. We have done a show every week in 2018. And as a podcast listener, I can tell you this, that is something to be excited and proud about. There's so many times that you start listening to a podcast and the people who do it kind of fall away or they don't keep up with it or they start missing episodes. And I think that's what keeps some people from jumping into a podcast because they're like, these guys going to be around in a couple months. You know, it's like starting a new relationship. Are they going to just ditch me or what? But we've done it every week in 2018, despite the fact that you moved house through sick and through health, through all kinds of different things that's happened in both of our lives. We have done this show every week, and I'm really proud of that.
Brad, as a relationship, I got to tell you, you have been an excellent show husband. We have done very well. And I hope that I've been a good show husband to you. We have really honored our relationship. We have stuck to our vows in sickness and in health. And we've done it. 2018. No, but in all seriousness, you know how like when a new TV season starts and you're like, I'm not going to try any of these because half of them are going to be gone in a month. And so you kind of wait to see who survives, and then you start watching. Well, now, if you've been on the fence, now is your chance to listen to Comic Lab because we're not going anywhere.
And you've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really proud of the year, and I'm really proud that I hooked my wagon to a star because if you want to have stick-to-itiveness, you got to stick with Brad Geiger. That's the guy to do something, a project with. Because at this point, I would have been, without Brad, I would have been on the couch with Cheeto dust all over my stomach, just watching old episodes of House Hunters International and forgetting to do a podcast. But Brad Geiger will keep you on task, and he's been a great show husband.
There is a little bit of value to having a touch of OCD because if we don't do that show every week, not only do I miss talking to you, but it's like we got to get that show done. We've got to do a show. You know, it's Tuesday. We got to be recording. You know.
Yeah, and we're wise enough, and this is true also with cartooning, is that I think we are now 2 shows ahead. We have 2 shows in the can that the world has not heard yet that we are ahead on. So if Brad gets sick, if I break my leg, if one of us has a family emergency, we've got shows in the can. And boy, that is good advice for somebody like myself who currently does not have a buffer on Sheldon or on Drive. So that's my life lesson for 2018 is learn from Brad and get that buffer back.
Yeah, a little bit. You said such a nice thing. I don't want to disagree with you this early in the show. I don't know that.
You're like, normally I wait till the 10-minute point.
I usually wait to my 15-minute contradiction zone, but I don't know that buffers are as important as they used to be.
Well, I just mean in general, if I get the flu or if some house crisis happens, it's good to have a buffer so that you can take care of life and the comic doesn't come to crashing to a halt. But 2018 was good in that regard, in that the older I get, the more accepting of my failures I get, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so the fact that I don't have a buffer when I was in my 20s or 30s, it would have killed me. But now in my 40s, I'm like, Dave, you're doing the best you can. And sometimes that's enough in life. Is to say, listen, you're doing the best. Honestly, the only thing you could take away from Dave is more sleep. So you can't do that. So just give yourself some credit, you know?
Well, the other part of that conversation is that it's a very different publishing atmosphere than it was 20 years ago. This is very different. We've said this before. People are not, for the most part, reading your comic on your website. You don't have to rely on that daily habit of going back to sheldoncomics.com. Most of this stuff is either being read on social media or alerted to through social media. I just don't think it's the same publishing atmosphere. Although your main takeaway, taking it easy on yourself, is absolutely right. At some point, for me, speaking strictly for myself, after a little while, it's like I've had so many mistakes, so many failures that it's not a new thing anymore. And it's like, oh yeah, I screwed up, and I'm gonna screw up,
Right.
and you can't get all wound up about that screw up, because the other thing that you learn is that it's going to be okay, and you're going to get past it, and how you deal with this is going to inform how you deal with all the other screw ups. And there's going to be a web tomorrow, and there's going to be a cartoon, and you're going to be the one doing it.
And the sun will come up and everything. Yeah. Well, you know what?
Yes.
That's such a good point that I kind of want to underline that before we
Yeah.
go into our 2018 review, which is becoming a pro is in many respects becoming better and better at just dealing with mistakes and errors.
Yes.
And in
Yeah.
some respects, that's life. In terms of as you get older, you just get better at being like, well, I seriously messed that up. All right, time to learn from it and pick it up and try something different. Well, Brad, the big picture item for 2018 is that I am proud to have hooked up with you because, and now I'm excited to review the year because it's good for people, ourselves included, and for the world to see that it's not just a highlight reel of social media. It's
Right.
There's failures along the way. So why don't we both start with one of our bigger failures? What do you think about that for the year, or our biggest learning moments for the year? Maybe that's a better way to say it. Brad, what is one of your biggest learning moments for 2018?
Well, so no, I don't mind talking about failures. I think as we've said on this show a number of times, failures is when you're learning the most, or at least when you should be learning the most. So I've got no problems calling this what it is, and that was a failure. And that is, I've got to constantly remind myself that webcomics as a business, webcomics as a thing, is a constantly evolving publishing strategy. And I need to be constantly questioning, therefore. And one area when I look back over 2018, especially listening to the shows, it helps that this show is on basically a 2-week delay. So when I'm listening to it, I forget what we talked about, and I hear myself for the first time. And it's like many times, it's even like in the course of 2 weeks, my mind has changed about certain things. And specifically, I'm talking Instagram, where if you listen back through Comic Lab, I hate Instagram, and then I'm trying Instagram, and then I hate Instagram, and then I'm giving it another chance, and then it's completely useless, and then I think I might like it. And I don't make any apologies for that, because that's me constantly questioning my approach. And one thing I always really remember is when you and I and Scott and Chris and a whole bunch of other men and women were starting webcomics back in the early 2000s. We were constantly beset by the syndicated cartoonists who could not see what we were doing, couldn't understand what we were doing, and responded in a very angry way to what we were doing. And do you remember being that young artist and saying, I'm never going to be like those guys. I'm never gonna be them. And the delightful thing, so I forget who I was talking to just a few days ago, but it's like, yeah, you know what? There hasn't been a print versus web flame war on the internet in years, because it's pretty much settled. We won.
Well,
but I never want to be those guys. And sometimes when I listen to my reaction to Instagram, specifically Instagram, I came really close to being those guys, and I need to constantly be on guard against that.
I know, and you know what? This is a personal failing of mine when it comes to web design, and I'll tell you what I mean. Like you, I want to constantly avoid being a 50, 60, 70-year-old cartoonist going, I'll never change again. I'm fixed in my ways. I don't want to. I don't want to be that, because our careers require nimbleness, as you have said. And the way that I spot myself getting crustified, like getting stuck in a position, is on a website that adapts to mobile. I don't know why I have
Oh,
not
I
done
know.
this yet. I don't know
Mhm.
why I am so crusty about it, but I'm like, the website's fine. They could use that one on their phone.
Yeah.
They don't need a mobile version. Why are these kids asking for a mobile version?
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just, that speaks to, we all have our version of Instagram for you. And for me, it's a mobile version of my website. And it's a failing of mine that I'm like, all right, I just got to do it, but I haven't done it yet. But, in fact, you know what, that goes to a bigger failing that I hadn't thought about, but I will talk about it for 2018, which is that
Mhm.
I have gotten, when I'm at my worst is when I have gotten fat and comfortable in life.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like the Roman Empire in the last 100 years. You're like, everything's fine. We'll let these other people fight our wars for us. I'm just going to enjoy these grapes sitting sideways on this weird couch. I'm fine. I'm just going to eat these grapes. I'm fine. And so
Yeah.
the thing I have to be careful of with my career is to not get too Romans in the last century of their empire, and where everything's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm sure it'll work out. And so for me, I've got to get back on and redesign both my websites. I've got to get that done.
Mhm.
There's a lot of just updates that they need. The last time they were updated was 4 or 5 years ago, if not more. And HTML5 and a lot of updates to different formatting things happen, and I've just got to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And I have not done that. That is another year of me failing to redesign my website. And since we constantly argue that is a core hub of our business, we should make those work as best as they can, and I do not right now. So that's a big failure of mine. It is a kind of an atrophy thing. It's like, it's fine. I'm sure the website's fine. I don't need to deal with that right now. And I've got to get on top of that. So that's something that I've failed on this year. But now let's turn to something that you were like, you look at and you go, wow, that went really well. What for 2018 went really well for you?
Oh, that's a great. Yeah, I like that because we'll go back and forth here. Here's one thing that I did do right, and that was this. In earlier years, I started to throttle back on comic conventions, and in 2018, I really went full stop. In 2017, I think I still experimented with a couple, but in 2018, I made the commitment to just go full stop on comic conventions, and I found out I really don't need them. And not only do I not need them, but not doing comic conventions was good for my business. It meant that I wasn't falling behind.
Right.
It meant that I wasn't trying to put a bunch of time into something that didn't deliver a big return on investment. And I wasn't traveling, which traveling has become a major headache these days. Just getting through security and going through all that misery and being packed into an airplane and just everything about air travel is a misery. And then doing stuff like handling sales tax registration and shipping my stuff to the place I'm going to be and doing the hotel. Everything about it is unhappiness. And I realized that I just don't need it. And not only don't need it, I did better without it because all of that time that I was sinking into a low return event like a comic convention, I was putting into stuff that had high return. Kickstarters, special offers on Patreon itself. The decision to go full stop on comic conventions, the decision to just get off of that treadmill was a really smart thing I did this year, and I'm happy I did it.
Yeah, I would agree with you from a distance, is that I could see the improvements that you've made on your Patreon schedule, on your Kickstarting this year, just based on your removal of travel. And I know that I'm supposed to go into a positive for 2018 right now, but I'll mention one more negative that my 2018 did, building off of your point, which is that 2018 Dave kind of screwed 2019 Dave, because I've scheduled 5 appearances for myself around the country in 2019, and I think I'm going to come to regret that. I think that's too many.
Yeah.
Since my kids were born, I've whittled down my appearance schedule to kind of 2 shows, Emerald City Comic Con and San Diego Comic Con. And this coming year, I'm going to be going to Alaska. I'm going to be going to WonderCon. I'm going to be going to NCS Fest in Huntington Beach. I'm going to be going to San Diego Comic Con and Emerald City Comic Con. And granted, 4 of those are in Southern California, but I feel like that's a lot of appearances over 2019, and this is my way of echoing you that you might be smart. In fact, I'm going to definitely echo that you were smart, and then I maybe made a mistake in 2018 by overscheduling my 2019. So
yeah.
there you have it. But that's my way of saying that Brad is onto something, that maybe we don't need scheduled appearances as much as we used to. Although I will say this, I sometimes feel like if you take away all appearances, you're a little bit robbing Peter to pay Paul. And here's what I mean by that. I think sometimes those relationships and moments that you cement with a reader in person, face to face, pays dividends down the road the next time you kickstart something, the next time you have a new book, the next time you have a project that you want people to start, because they have that personal connection to you face to face, handshake to handshake.
Yeah.
And so I do a tiny bit disagree with Brad that I think there are still dividends to trips and to appearances. Although I will agree with him that he has made excellent use of this year in 2018 by not going to any. Brad, how do you feel about me calling you wonderful? How do you feel about that?
Well, as often happens, Dave, I find your perceptiveness remarkable. I think I am very wonderful.
Well, that's great. So we both agree then that you're great.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Well, hold on. I do get what you're saying about making those personal relationships. I get that, and there's a certain value to that, but I think you've got to weigh it in what you're giving up. And I think you can forge a lot of those kind of same relationships on social media with a kind word and thoughtfulness and stuff like that. But at the same time, I see when people come up to you, for example, year after year at San Diego Comic-Con, and how they look forward to seeing you and look forward to that moment where they get to pick up one of your books and have it sketched in by you. And
Sure.
you make a very good point.
Well, yeah, and it's also I've talked about this before. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but something about a show, once you're there, once you're set up, once the books are in place, and once you start meeting people, it's good for the soul to meet the readers that read you.
Mm-hmm.
There is something lovely about that. But we I don't want to belabor that point too much because we've got a whole year to review on today's show.
Yeah. Well, now here's what I want to hear from you. What's something you did in 2018 that was a big success?
Well, we've already covered that my friendship with Brad Geiger has been a big win for me. A big up. Like, there's no complaints about that. But no, the thing that I'm going to talk about this more on the 2019 planning show, which I think will come next week.
Yeah.
But my 2018 was both ruined and saved by my move of a house, and then by my calendar system. And so I want to talk about planning, because planning was one of the big things that I did right in 2018. So as you guys remember from the earlier part of these episodes this year, I talked a lot about my magnetic calendar, which is my week-to-week calendar, where I've made little physical magnets that say tasks that I have to do regularly every week. Like, you've got to post Drive comic on Patreon. You got to post Drive on the website. You got to post Drive Tales of the Drive on the Patreon or on the website. You got to do Sheldon. You got to go to the gym. You got to check your Google AdSense money. You got to check your Patreon money. You got to check all this, all the little checklist of things that I have to do week to week and month to month. So I have that calendar going. And then I have a big monthly calendar, which gives me a quick 30-day look at what's coming up and what's behind me and what I'm doing this week. And then bigger than that, I have a 12-month calendar that I've made for my pin board that tells me big events like, listen, in about 4 weeks, you've got to start getting the Kickstarter video ready. And in 3 weeks, you've got to start getting the script ready for the Kickstarter video, that kind of stuff. And the reason that was such a big win for me this year is that no sooner had I made all of that calendaring for the year, then a week later, and I had all these plans locked down. I'm like, great, 2018 is going to be amazing. And then my wife and I found a house that we did not expect to love as much as we loved, and we put an offer on it, and we bought it. And then our whole life went topsy-turvy for 6 months as we moved house and prepped the old house to sell and lived in boxes, and all that's, I mean, you remember at one point I was sleeping in my studio underneath my drawing desk as I repainted my whole house. And so anyway, 2018 fell apart because of the move. But here's what I want to get at. The calendar was great because anytime I had a moment to get back on schedule, all I needed to do was look at the calendar, see what I had missed, see what was next up on the list, and get right back to it. And so
Yeah.
even though I moved house, I still put out 2 books this year. I still did a Patreon special offer. I still went to, I think, 3, if not 4 appearances around the country. And I still had a cough, cough, semi-regular appearances on Sheldon and Drive in terms of regularity of updates. So was it a perfect year? Absolutely not. But the calendaring and the scheduling and the to-do lists all paid off because whenever there was a resumption of normality in my life, I could jump right back on my to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, what are your thoughts about that?
I like that a lot. And it's something that I continually, it's been one of my failures. In fact, I'm looking right now in my studio. Again, I bought one of those big planners, that a very nice planning calendar. And I had all of 2018 scoped right out. And by February, I had stopped writing in it. I'd fallen away from it. All of the pages are pristine as the day I bought them in the store after about March or so. And I failed again at doing good calendar planning. And I'm sitting there, and the one thing I did do, I bought like a monthly calendar, a desk calendar, the kind that sits flat on your desk and takes up a huge, what would that be, 14 by 24 spot on your desk. And I did write in that, and I did do some rudimentary planning there throughout the year. But I just got to try again to do better planning. I've not done good at that.
All right, well, hold on. I'm going to stop you because as much as you say you're not that good at it, you're great at it. And shut up and stop talking negative about my friend Brad Geiger. Don't be mean to my friend Brad Geiger. No, I'm going to say this. You're great at the week in and week out to-dos. I think maybe I would say as a friend that maybe your weak spot is your longer term planning. But
yes,
your daily and your weekly to-dos you're a master of that. So don't give yourself too much guff. You're great at putting out a lot of material week in, week out on Patreon and on your website. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that is one thing that and I'm telling you, going analog has helped me a lot. In other words, I'm not relying on some app or my iPhone or anything like that. Going analog and just using Post-it notes that are annoying me on my computer, and I just do them so I can take them off, has been a big help. That has been a positive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So Dave.
Yes.
Let's go back. We did a negative. We did a positive. It's time for us to admit failure once again. What's something that didn't work out so well last year for you?
That didn't work out so well for me. Okay, well, I'll talk about my Kickstarter planning. And again, this goes back to the move, but it speaks to how much when you have a Kickstarter, you have to be ready for a full 30-day commitment of attention. Much like Willy Loman, attention must be paid to a Kickstarter. And so my Kickstarter, because of my printing schedule, I needed it out by, I think it was San Diego Comic-Con, which meant I had to start in January, right? And get that whole thing going and get it all printed and get the Kickstarter going, all that. And so come hell or high water, I had to do the Kickstarter at a certain point in my calendar year. And I suffered for it because of the house move. And frankly, there was no way around it. There was nothing that I could have done. I should probably be nice about myself. But it was a failure because, no, it's not a failure. The Kickstarter did okay. Mm-hmm. But I think the Kickstarter could have done 30 to 50% better than it did had I been able to give it my full attention and a better promotional schedule for those 30 days. And so basically what I'm coming to here is don't move house the same 30 days that you are doing a Kickstarter. I don't recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know if you classify that as a failure but it's just a learning lesson that if you're doing your finals for your master's degree at the same time you're doing your Kickstarter, don't do it. if you know that you are going through a divorce the same time you have a Kickstarter, don't do it. Maybe if you
Yeah.
know that someone's got a surgery in the family planned for spring, don't do your Kickstarter in spring. I guess what I'm saying is, if there's something that's avoidable, or a scheduling thing that you can see coming up, do yourself the solid of not scheduling your Kickstarter at the same time, because my house move absolutely proved to me that if you don't give your Kickstarter 100% attention, it will not do as well as you hoped.
Right.
And maybe that's too sweeping a comment. Maybe life happens. And so I'm basically just saying that my Kickstarter was impacted by my move, and learn from that if you can.
Yeah. No, that's perfectly fair.
Now, Brad, give me yours. What's your another big, not big one? What's another learning moment / failure for Brad Geiger in 2018?
Well, one thing that I do have to get better on, and I'm gonna have the opportunity, is I've got to get better when it comes to hiring people to take part in my comic. And I want to say at the outset, because I know she listens, I am absolutely positively not talking about Alex Heberling. Alex Heberling is a fantastic part, is a constant joy in my life. So I'm not talking about Alex, but I did contract with someone to redo my website at the beginning of the year, and it's something that I wanted to have in place by at least this summer. And I know exactly what I need done, and I know exactly what needs to be done. I just don't have A, the time, and B, the skills to do it. And I contracted somebody mainly on the strength of the fact that I knew this person in another career. I knew them when I was working a different job. And this person is now segued into doing WordPress design. And that was the strength on which I hired this person. And there has been no forward motion, and I've gotten I've really gotten the feeling that it's just never going to get done, and so I need to basically make two important decisions in 2019, and I need to use that failure as a guiding light. Remember when they actually covered this at Patricon, where they said when you're hiring somebody, don't hire them just because you know them. Don't hire them just because it's convenient. Hire the person because of what they can bring to the table. And I got a feeling I'm going to have to find a new WordPress designer / developer in 2019 to restart this website. And I'm at the point where I really think I'm going to have to bring an assistant aboard to help out with some of this stuff.
Right.
And I'm going to have to use that negative experience to guide these next couple of decisions, and hire people on the strength of what they're bringing to the table, not just because it'll be easier to work with this person because I already know them. And I think I'm going to have to break myself of that. I fell into a very common pitfall, don't you think?
Oh, Brad, yes. And
Yeah.
so for anyone out there that's thinking about their first hire or their second hire, or hiring an outside vendor or something like that, learn from Brad and I, because this has happened to me maybe 2 or 3 times over my career as well, which is why I'm 0% judgmental about Brad's impasse that he's at.
Yeah.
And that is, you're busy, you don't have the time to do a lot of headhunting for different people for positions, and so sometimes you go with the low hanging fruit of like, oh, Greg's got a cousin that can do shipping, or Susan can do website design. I know Susan from that party,
Right.
and frankly, it's imagine if you propose marriage the same way, like, oh, that guy from the office seems fine. He knows how to handle a photocopier. That's fine. I'm sure this marriage will work out great. Like, if you go with the low hanging fruit of quote unquote people in your life, it's very often the easier route that will unfortunately bite you in the ass down the line.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people do it, but I personally would recommend against hiring friends and family, or working with friends and family in that regard. I think it is better to have clean breaks when they're possible at the end of a working relationship. And with family or friends, you'll never get that clean break. And in fact, it might color your relationship with them, the personal relationship with them, by the failings of the working relationship. So
Yeah.
personally, I think I have done what Brad's done, which is gone with the low hanging fruit and go, that person will be fine. And boy, have I regretted it. And so
Yeah.
I think that's a great lesson to learn from Brad and I, which is take a little extra time. You are introducing these people into your life and into your life's work. Make sure they are the right person. Get a couple resumes. Have a couple interviews. It's going to take you a week or two, but it's worth it in the long run, right, Brad? Wouldn't you
Yeah.
say?
No, interviews and again, that thing they talked about at PatreCon, sitting down in the first opening days and say, okay, what do you expect from me, and what do I expect from you, and vice versa. What are some things that are on their minds? What are they hoping for?
Yeah.
And and obviously having a good contract, it goes along with those things, but setting up expectations and managing expectations well, I would think is going to be really a big part of making that whole relationship work better.
Oh yeah. And you know what? I will say take a page from every corporate hiring you've ever been involved in, where they ask for one or two side people in their life that they could speak to. Because sometimes if you're going to hire someone, say for website design or for fulfillment or for, I'm thinking of any other thing, printing, pre-production, right? Just
Hmm.
say, can I speak to any other one of your clients, a client from the last 6 months? And you'll be able to suss out real quick if they've just passed you on to their cousin, or if it's a real genuine client. And just a
Right.
few quick pointed questions, and you'll be in much better standing as to what kind of performance you can expect out of these people. So um, uh, I think that puts the nail in that coffin of that issue. So Brad, why don't you tell me, jump in back onto the positive track, one thing that you did
Hmm.
right this year? I want to hear
Absolutely.
Brad's self-love. Well, that sounds terrible. I'm going to change.
Oh God, no!
I'm
You
going to
don't want to
change.
hear that.
I'm going to change that phrase entirely. I'm going to bail out. So, guys, one of the biggest things I failed on this year was using the phrase self-love when referring to Brad. I'm going to immediately bail out on that.
So here's a positive that I'm actually kind of proud of, because it's a lesson I learned at exactly this time last year, and I've been
Okay.
able to apply it, and I think I've done a pretty good job of it. And that is this: remember last year at about this time, Patreon changed its payment system, and there was an entire crisis across social media in terms of people's reactions, and the world was coming to an end, and it was death knell for Patreon, and so on and so forth. And I had, if you listen to the shows around that time, I was giving a lot of thought to how our reaction to a crisis as creators, as leaders of our own communities and micro communities, how our reactions as creators and leaders shape the reactions of the people who follow us on
Okay.
social media,
Okay.
follow our art. And I've done a much better job in 2018 in signaling to my followers, signaling to my audience, calm and reserved, mainly calm in the face of crisis. For example, when we, particularly as a not safe for work creator right now, we're coming into very dicey times, right?
Okay.
The Sesta Fasta laws are being interpreted by different sites and different platforms in very different ways. Facebook seems to be cracking down an awful lot on any kind of sexualized conversation at all, even like saying very simple things that would normally be very acceptable, like,
Right.
this is my preference, or those kind of conversations. Tumblr, of course, took a very hardline approach. And I think it would be very easy to get wrapped up and swept away by all of that panic. But again, if you did same thing as that Patreon situation 12 months ago, if you do that, if you signal panic to your community, they're going to respond with panic. And I think, especially for those of my friends who are working not safe for work, I think right now is a very good time to exercise calm reactions, even though we may be panicking. Believe me, I'm having my own moments of panic. I don't share them on social media. you know,
Right.
but I'm having my own moments. And I think this is a good time to remember that, number one, your followers are going to gauge their reaction in part based on your reaction. And
Yep.
also, things are going to change. No matter what, no matter how this next round happens, things are going to change over the next several years, one way or the other, just through the nature of the internet. One of the things that's going to change the internet over the next 5 years is paid streaming content is going to change how people consume things like free webcomics.
Right.
Disney's coming out with a streaming service. Universal's coming out with a streaming service. Pretty soon, everybody's going to have their own streaming services. They're all going to be competing with one another, and we're going to be ending up paying a lot more for content as internet consumers than we ever did. That's going to have a trickle-down effect on people like us.
Yep.
So no matter, even if the Sesta Fasta stuff, kind of fizzles out, which we could all be so lucky. Even if that kind of thing happens, the web is still going to change and change drastically over the next 10 years. If we get caught up in panic, we're not going to be able to survive those changes. Instead, this is a really good time to take your moments of calm and start thinking about, okay, if this change happens, what am I going to do? If that change happens, what's some changes that I can see right now starting to crest that I can be prepared for? And then when that stuff does happen, when you do hit social media, remain calm, project calmness, and be ready with an answer. And if you don't have an answer, keep your mouth shut until you do. I guess my main point here is that the lesson I learned in 2018 is project calm to your community, even if you're not necessarily very calm, and use that to direct your next step. Stay calm and get to the next thing, and your audience, your community is going to follow that calmness. The worst thing you can do is break into panic and run around that the sky is falling, because then when the sky doesn't fall again, now you're going to be standing there trying to get your community members to calm down the panic that you helped to incite.
Yeah.
So stay calm. That's something I was able to do at different points in 2018 that I'm kind of happy with, that I was able to project a little calm even at times when I wasn't feeling very calm.
Right. Well, and I want to underline this by saying a fundamental truth that Brad is getting at there, which is that you are an entertainer.
Yeah.
And you can't get too far away from that central idea, because you are bringing to people a sense of joy, a sense of entertainment, a sense of insight, and frankly, a sense of connectedness with other human beings. That's what your art is doing. And so anytime you introduce anxiety or introduce nervousness or introduce discomfort, you're doing basically the negative aspects of what entertainment should be doing, which is making people feel like the world is okay, their life is okay, they are connected to other human beings, they're not alone. But when you add anxiety, you're doing the opposite of that. And so now listen, I say that knowing that some people's brand, some people's comics is to talk about their insecurities or the battles that they're having with their health or what's going wrong in their life. And even that is a form of connectedness, because we're saying, look, my life has its problems too. So I get that. But what Brad is saying is, don't let the artifices, the business aspects or the technical aspects of your cartooning become an anxiety for your readers, because then that puts a wall between them and your cartooning and them and the enjoyment of your art. Do you think that's a good summary, Brad?
I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. Fantastic.
Oh,
So Dave,
well,
let's go
yes.
back to your successes. What did you do in 2018 that you're particularly proud of? It worked out really well.
Well, so I took a moment a few weeks ago and I did a little bit of audio fiddling. And I think the highlight of my year really was introducing Little Spanish Flea into the ComicLab podcast. That's right,
Yeah.
Little Spanish Flea, one of the best audio hits that I could have introduced to this show. All right. I've been here with Brad Geiger. He's in Philadelphia. I'm in Los Angeles. We're talking comics on ComicLab at patreon.com/ComicLab. Just a reminder, the show is made possible by your friendship, your consideration, your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So join us at $2 a month, $1 a month, $5 a month, anything you can spare over at ComicLab, patreon.com/ComicLab. Brad Geiger, back to you. No, I'm just kidding.
So well done. No, that was very, very good. That was very good. But
that was on the fly and unplanned. Thank you. No, so what did I do well? I will be honest, and I know we were talking about this before, but I will be honest that one of the nicest things to come out of 2018 for me is that even if it's only audio, I get to hang out with you more, and that's just been delightful.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed that. It has made my year happier, and not to sound cheesy, but I am happier when I get to joke around with you about comics. It's great.
Yeah, well, and it's been a really delightful way to kind of reconnect with my joy of cartooning in general. Because it could be very easy to just kind of get caught up in the, I got a pencil, I got to ink, I got to write, I got a pencil, I got to ink, I got to write, I got to post, I got to social, I got a pencil, I got to ink. And
yeah, you're right. You're so right.
And talking with you, you've got such a contagious optimism, a contagious sense of joy about life in general, but about comics and cartooning specifically, that it's nice to expose myself to that on a regular basis because it's an easy kind of mindset to catch on to.
Yeah, it's been your laughter fills my heart. And so now it's sounding like a love letter. I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone. I'm happily married. No, anyway, so before I get into what I did right for 2018, I just wanted to say one of the nicer things that happened this year was reconnecting with you in such a lovely way and doing this show. And I'm so glad to see that people are responding to it. And
yes,
because I love laughing with you and I love talking comics and I love planning out the business aspect and the art aspect of what's coming for us in the future. And it's really fun doing the show with you. So anyway, that's enough of me praising you. What did I do right in 2018? So one thing that I want to talk about, and we haven't talked about it for probably 6 months or so, but I continue to find it so helpful for my career, is Bonjoro. Do you remember this one, Brad?
Yes.
So Bonjoro, for those that haven't experimented with it, when you sign up for Sheldon on Patreon or Drive on Patreon or buy a Sheldon book or get a Sheldon original or one of many different ways that you could support Dave Kellett online, what happens is I get a little notification on an app on my phone called Bonjoro saying, hey, Brad Geiger bought a book. Brad Geiger supported you on Patreon. Brad Geiger got an original piece of art. And it sets it up in a queue on this app. And I record to Brad and say, I turn on the camera on my phone and I record a quick 10 to 30 second message just says, Brad Geiger, hey, it's Dave Kellett in the studio. And oh my gosh, I just saw you got a book. And that means the world to me because that not only means you're enjoying the book, but it means I get to continue to be a cartoonist. So you are making tomorrow's comic happen. Thank you so much. Boop. And then you send it. And the reaction to that, the emotional reaction to that has been so lovely to see from readers saying, you know, I've been reading you for 10 years. I've never seen you because I live in South Africa. This was amazing to get. Thank you so much. Or we met at Comic-Con in 2007 and it's so lovely to see this video from you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate your work. And all that is amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see.
And not only that, but here's a little pro tip that I didn't know about until we got talking about this a couple months ago. If you're going to use Bonjoro, do set up in the preferences a little thing, and I forget how they word it, but I do know it's in the sending preferences, that if your Bonjoro goes without being opened, 3 days later, or you can set the number of days. I think, Dave, didn't you say 3 days is what you used?
Yep.
3 days later, they will resend it, because what we're finding out is that people assume that that's just a canned message. They don't realize it's a message just for them.
Yeah, and
so
rightly
that when
so,
it
because most of
comes,
life is automated. So why would they
yes,
assume?
yeah. And when it comes to them, as soon as they sign up for Patreon, for example, they just assume they're getting another canned video, like the thank you video that you pre-record on Patreon itself. They're just assuming it's that. And so when it gets resent to them 3 days later, and I think the message that Bonjoro attaches to it is something like, "Hey, I recorded a video just for you, and you didn't open it, and I want to make sure that you saw it." Which is very direct language and
Yep.
very effective language, because then what happens is you'll find out 3 days later, all of a sudden, those people that didn't open your video now have opened it and are thrilled that you've taken the time to do this. And I don't know that Dave do you think you recorded probably more Bonjoros, because you went in and set up a bunch of different instances for your Bonjoro. How you spent extra time doing it. Do you think that it was time well spent? Do you think you got a good return on investment on that extra time?
Yeah, and let's put this in context of you doing shows, or not doing shows
Mm-hmm.
rather, is that Bonjoro replaces shows in many respects. And so
Yeah.
taking the half a day to full day that I did to set up a bunch of automations for different aspects of my business online, like selling originals, selling books, doing Patreon. Once I got all that in place, it becomes a 1 to 2 minute thing every day to record these Bonjoros, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that some of those videos, and I'm not joking, get rewatched like 5 times by somebody. And so
Yeah.
somebody's having a very personal reaction. Don't make this creepy. Somebody's having a very personal reaction to that personal video to them if they're watching it 5 times. And so that's the equivalent of me getting on a plane, flying to Chicago, going to C2E2, setting up a booth, going to a bad breakfast at my hotel, and then having a 1 minute really pleasant conversation with the reader. Instead, the Bonjoro, I take 1 minute, I turn around at my desk, I say, "Hey, it's Dave Kell in the studio. Thank you so much, Greg or Susan or Bobby or Jimmy." Boy, I pick weird names. And then so that what I'm getting at is that 1 minute on Bonjoro replaces all that schlepping across the country to go to a show in Chicago or
Mm-hmm.
New York or
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles or Dallas,
Yeah.
and it's really effective. So yes, Brad, I would say that was worth all the time,
Yeah.
especially for someone who doesn't go to comics conventions anymore.
Yeah. No, I guess that's the point I was trying to make, is that it may feel like, oh gosh, I'm really getting bogged down in these. But the return on investment is so solid that you really can't not do it. I don't think,
Yeah.
you're really going a long way in not only keeping those, like specifically for Patreon, not only keeping those people as patrons, but I'm gonna put money on, if they ever do a study, they're gonna find out that those people who got Bonjuros stayed a little longer. I wouldn't doubt that in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, just human reactions to things. Anytime there's that kind of human touch on things, it makes you a little bit more hesitant. Your mouse is hovering over the cancel pledge bit a little bit longer. You're like, well,
Yeah.
Brad seems like a nice guy. I can't do this to him.
Yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit longer.
Yeah, exactly.
So, listen, I think we've got time for about one more. What are we up to? Failures or successes?
I was going to ask you. I forgot.
I think we just did positive. So let's end on a low note. And do one more round of something that you learned from, and I'll start off.
Okay.
One thing that I didn't do quite as well as I should have, and that was something I mentioned a couple episodes ago, and that is remembering that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes social media is best as a one-way communication. And what I mean by that is, obviously, I'm not talking about pleasantries that you're exchanging, because those not only are good community building, but they're good for your algorithm. The more a post gets engagement, the more that it's going to be propagated by the social media in question. So when somebody responds to you and you respond in a kindness and those kind of communications, that you want to maximize. But and I found myself a couple of times getting drawn into it. Those moments that there's a disagreement, and you find yourself in that XKCD moment where you're sitting in front of your computer saying somebody on the internet is wrong, and you're getting completely engaged in that. That's when you got to remind yourself that this is an instance in which social media can be a one-way communication. And if you just let that drop, that thing that you disagree with, number one, chances are, being very realistic, you're not going to change that other person's mind anyway. We've been doing social media ever since there's been social media, Dave. How often have you seen somebody's mind changed by something that they read on social media? Very seldom. Very seldom do you see somebody going, "Oh my goodness, you've given me a completely new way to look at this."
I'll tell you this, Brad. You've been trying. We've known each other for what, 10, 20 years now? You've been trying for 20 years to change my mind. Still hasn't happened. So
I know.
I would say social media. You're not going to make it happen, Brad. You're not going to make it happen. Let me put it this way. I so many times I've learned in my life that you kind of only make the situation worse when you engage with the negativity. Like, not only do you not change their mind, they could become further entrenched with their either hatred or displeasure with you. And so you're like, well, great. I've just dug my grave bigger. This is wonderful. I'm so glad I engaged with you.
Yeah.
That being said, I still advocate for a kind response, a short response, an empathic response. But no, like Brad said, you're not going to change their mind. It's not going to work. It's cold and dispersonal enough where you're not going to change their mind. So I agree with Brad that it's best to redirect those energies back towards creativity.
Yes. And also remember, the more you engage that in the exact same way that pleasantries make the algorithm propagate further, unpleasantries make the algorithm propagate that post further as well. So if there's something somebody said as a response to one of your posts, for example, that is turning into unpleasantry, the more you engage that, the more you're amplifying that other person's unpleasantry. And the one thing that we've got, in fact, we're gonna, at some point we should talk about. We should do a show, Dave, where we just do planning for 2019. Here's something that we need to do, and I haven't talked to you about this yet, so I'm springing this on you. For ComicLab, we need to do something a little different, and here's what it is. We've got such a advantage over any other podcaster, or almost any other podcaster, and we don't use it. And that is this: the people who listen to our show all have very strong social media voices. In other words, that person that I'm using in my example, that we're having a unpleasant exchange, that person might have like 50 Twitter followers. Right? I've got a lot more than 50, right? People who are silly enough to follow me. But I've got more than 50. And so if I engage with that person, I am amplifying their negativity in a way that they haven't earned, right? And that's what made me think of this, Dave. We need to do a better job of reminding our listeners to go out and talk about the show, because they've got loud voices. When our listeners are talking about ComicLab, they're not like the run-of-the-mill social media user who's got 25, 50 followers. They've earned a lot of followers. We need to be exploiting them more. We need to be telling especially our Patreon backers, but our listeners in general, we need to be reminding them to go out on social media and tell people how great we are, because they've got loud voices.
Goodness. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Well, Brad, ending on that fantastic note of doing better. So the good news is, in the week ahead, in the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to do our 2019 plans, which is great because we'll build off of all these 2018 learnings and apply them to what we're going to do in 2019. And I think that'll be a fun transition for people to hear. Is like, here's all the pluses and minuses from Dave and Brad's 2018, and here's how they're learning from it from 2019. Don't you think that'll be a fun way to do this?
Not only that, but we ought to make a post on our Patreon page and encourage our backers to do the same. What worked last year, and what are you planning for next year?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, because we can learn from each other in all kinds of different ways. And I think what we're going to see is there's going to be a lot of similarities, that we're all dealing with many of the same issues. So we'll look for that on patreon.com/ComicLab. We'll start a year in review post that you guys, you folks out there, can join in and say, hey, here's something that worked for me that we haven't talked about yet. And here's something I'm planning for next year.
Yeah. There are a few things in my life that get me more excited than career planning for the year ahead. I get legitimately giddy and excited about it. So I'm excited for next week's episode.
I can vouch for that. Yes.
If you're wanting to hear an optimistic and can-do Dave Kellett, listen to the episode where I talk about my plans for the year ahead, because everything is blue skies and sunny days with things that have yet to be tackled. And so it'll be a fun show next week. So anyway, on that note, Brad Geiger, I want to say thank you for 2018. It has been a delight doing this show with you, and I'm looking forward to 2019.
And the same to you, my friend. It's been fantastic. And that means that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts this 2018 have been Brad Geiger, my friend and the editor of Webcomics.com, and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And the wonderful and kind Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from the very talented musician Andy Creighton, who I love his music. Go check it out at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes was edited by the very talented, very kind Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab, so we're going to go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
Ah, the French champagne.